Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's an absolute privilege to be joined by Jason Eubanks. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate you guys having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on the show, Jason.
By way of an introduction, Jason, you're currently CRO at Harness, where you've helped them grow ARR by 10,000% in 4.5 years, reaching a valuation of 3.7 billion in just 6 years. Harness was obviously founded by Jyoti Bansal, who is also behind the amazing success story, which is App Dynamics. And we're genuinely excited to tell your story, Jason, because your personal trajectory is just astonishing. Your rise to executive leadership is enviably rapid, and you've taken leadership roles within the first 10 years from when you first joined the industry as an individual contributor. And you've been part of some amazing success stories such as Twilio and Meraki. So, Jason, take us right to the beginning. Where did it all start for you?
Sure. The very first software job, is that what you want to know?
I don't know. Is there anything interesting before?
Most of which we don't want discovered on the internet, most likely. Yeah. Yeah. So, I was fortunate enough to get into software directly out of college. In fact, I accepted a job with a boutique consulting tech firm about 7 months before I graduated my senior year of college. As luck was have it, I showed up to the first day of work to find the signage being taken down and the CA logo being put up in its place. So in that time that I was finishing up school, CA had come along and gobbled up some consulting firms, and that was one of them. So I started, right away in software. Initially, because of that acquisition, on the services and consulting side in a technical role, and focusing on network and security assessments, things like that. Went on from there to pick up the CA technology stack and move through the services side of the house over to pre-sales, interacting with customers, and then finally into sales and sales leadership. Yeah. So from there, I stayed there about 10 years and was recruited then into BMC. So about 2009, late 2009, I showed up in Miami to a BMC SKO and found myself waiting across the hall from their main event space where I could hear all the loud music and the energy, and sat there waiting to meet Scott Davis and Brian Kidder, who were interviewing me as the senior leaders at the time of building out BMC's enterprise sales teams, which was post-acquisition of BladeLogic, of course. That's where John McMahon and Scott and all the rest of the crew came into BMC's ranks. So after I fumbled my way through an interview process with the two of them where they were drilling me on sales process and pipeline generation and all the things that you guys have probably talked to many guests before me about here on this show, I then was asked to go meet with John McMahon. And that was a very interesting experience for me. And meeting John as part of that interview process has forever changed not only my career and my network, but also the way that I think about the interview itself. Just really learning to interview for intangibles. And John was not the interview that I thought he would be. I expected to get more drilling down on sales leadership and sales process and recruiting and things of that nature. And he did open up with a couple of those questions, but after he got me into a rhythm, it kind of boxed into this rhythm around the normal interview construct. He shifted quickly and started asking me questions that I just didn't anticipate. Things like what my college GPA was. And that immediately instilled panic in me because my college GPA was average at best. It was a 3.0. And so I answered him without hesitation, but went on to try to explain it away and let him know that it wasn't because I was out partying 7 days a week, although I did have my fair share of fun in college. it was because I had had these 3 jobs while I was also carrying a full course load. I had switched majors halfway through the year from engineering, or halfway through the journey from engineering and into information systems, and had to pick some hours up along the way so I could finish within 4 years. And he asked me why it was important to finish within 4 years. And I went on to share that I had, that I was funding college myself. And he asked about that process of paying for it. And then I shared that I was the first one to go to college in my family. And so he kept digging, and I was thinking in the back of my mind the whole time that he's asking these questions of, how does this relate to my ability to build and lead a sales team? But what he was doing, after we got through that process, the next thing he asked me was about my first job, when I got my first job. And I answered, it was in construction, and I was 12 years old. And he basically stopped me at that point and told me that I had the job, that we were going to move forward. And then he went on to open up and share with me his rationale for those kind of interview questions. And he said, would you like to understand why I was asking these questions? I said, yes, I would. And he said, the GPA question is actually not an intellect question. It's a character question. And if someone were to hesitate or refuse to answer or act like they didn't remember, they're lying to you. And if you can't trust them to answer a simple question like that, you'll never be able to trust what they're telling you on a forecast call. And so we could go on with stories like this all day, but it's a lot of fun. It was my first, working with the team there at BMC and the leadership roles. It was my first exposure to the value-based selling framework and the playbook that all of you know so well. So yeah.
I think it's a really, really important step, because actually, that was your very first time being exposed to the playbook. And actually, what's interesting is that you reflect now, and you reflect to this day, and you say, that interview changed my life, and it's not because you first entered the community, that playbook community, but actually it's changed your perspective about some of the fundamentals which actually underpin the power of this playbook, which is about finding the right people. So what's the kind of the biggest impact? What's the biggest takeaway you took from that as a process, and how have you been able to use that, and how's that helped you, with the success and that amazing trajectory that you've gone on, through your leadership career?
Yeah, great question. I would say that, certainly I shared one of the first takeaways, which is learning to, as you go out and seek to recruit and retain the best talent in the market, learning to interview for the intangibles and really weed through potential hiring mistakes. And that process has served me well for hundreds and hundreds of interviews since. But one of the biggest takeaways from that process is the process itself. The learning to dig in and understand the data that ultimately form the leading indicators of the business. So you're managing the activity inputs and understanding the trend lines that help you see around the corner versus simply reacting to outcomes that have already shaped up. The yelling at the scoreboard versus really helping understand how to dig in and make each one of your reps successful and optimize productivity per head. And a big factor around that is not just executing a value-based selling framework process, but it is in fact digging in and understanding the leading indicators that are signals to where the trajectory that you're on, where the business is going, where the market's going, and what you have to do accordingly to shape the next 6, 9, 12 months of execution, maybe even years. And so I'd say that was one of the biggest takeaways. It was the first time in my career, at CA, we were in the sales culture at CA, we became very, very good at slinging and negotiating big deals. Lots of products, big install base, leveraging, compelling contract events. And so it was my first time really in learning the science around the art of selling, and that science of building and leading teams and running the business was my time at BMC. And I've applied it in every role since then. And you can't, I believe that you can't take it, what you've learned in one place and apply it 100% the same way in the same context, every spot after that, every job after that. but it has been the backbone of certainly my thought process and the way that I teach my leaders, and also the way that I look at the business. And we had to make some adjustments along the way. After BMC, I went into the startup world and was fortunate enough to work at Meraki, which was the world's first cloud networking architecture, started out of MIT by Sanjit Biswal, John Bickett, and Hans Robertson, who are all off doing great things now at other companies. They're all multi-time founders, but they were great partners to work with and learn from, and they had set up a fantastic, along with Andy McCall, who was running worldwide sales back then. They had set up a fantastic high velocity, high morale culture. In fact, I remember the first day I showed up at Meraki, I got off the elevator and dodged a Nerf dart that was coming at me. So that was an interesting picture if you want to visualize it as to how different the culture was between, let's say, a BMC, this big public software company with a rigid operating rhythm, well-documented sales process, intent on inspection, to getting off the elevator, seeing ultimately kind of a boiler room type of setup, a pit full of salespeople on headphones, taking calls, doing demos at stand-up desks, hot swapping SEs in, very little process. Everything was on the fly, it's happening fast. Nerf darts flying around, footballs being tossed, while they're on customer demos. And so it was a completely night and day contrast. And I think that if I had taken exactly what I had learned in the sales framework, the leading indicators, managing the metrics, developing people, and applied it in exactly the same way, which are all great things, and have changed my career. But if I had applied it exactly the same way that we operated at BMC into that culture at Meraki, I'm pretty certain I would have been voted off the island within a couple of quarters. So it was you had to adapt and really be aware of the opportunity in front of us, the product, the different personas and the buying methodologies that were already working before I got there. But at the time, Meraki was about 11 million when I got there. And I was coming in as an enterprise sales leader and ultimately ended up running enterprise sales worldwide there over 4 years. And that 11 million became 600 million for the company. And we went from about 10% of that revenue or so on the enterprise side to 50%. So a couple million to 300 million for enterprise. The rest of it was made up through the inside sales motion, commercial. And it was a great learning opportunity to see this high velocity motion, and but also a good chance for me to come in and take some of the principles and basics that we had, those skills that we had developed around leadership at BMC, and insert them into that culture and build that culture, extend it around that process.
We've heard people being impacted by the playbook. They've moved to BMC or they've joined an App Dynamics. They found a sales motion that actually works. And lots of them go into the next organization and they feel, do you know what, let's just apply exactly the same. But what was it specifically that made you realize that wouldn't work?
It's a good question. I think just looking at what was working. So at the time that I was hired in for enterprise to come in and build out enterprise teams, the part of the business that was functioning well was the commercial side of the business. Commercial was defined at Meraki as they were inside sellers. They were all based at a hub office, mainly San Francisco, working shifts to cover every time zone globally. So even if we had global coverage on the inside sales team, it operated out of San Francisco. So they kept this culture was very well ingrained. This high morale, sort of high work hard, play hard, high velocity sales cycle culture was right there in front of me, and I could see it working. And it was something that I could see was in complete contrast to everything that I had just come from. And the way I looked at it was that's a different segment. And that's likely not going to be 100% transferable to the enterprise side of the business, which is employees. That was defined as companies that were 1,000 employees and above. So it's a big market, but as you go up, of course, up segment, you get increasingly more complex decision making and buying patterns within these customers. It was more heavily contested against the incumbents like Cisco and the behemoths. And so I knew that we would have to have some kind of process. I wasn't sure what it was going to be at the time. And I knew that there was something that was working already that was driving 90% of the revenue for the company on the other side. And so I just set out to learn what they were doing in commercial sales that was working. And velocity was key to that. And so one of the first things I did was simply, start building a team. I only had a couple reps. Once we started building the team out, though, one of the first things I did was apply the principles around understanding the leading indicators of the business and just pull the data through, right? And so I let the data tell me what the process should be. And when I benchmarked, sort of A/B tested a couple different approaches for a couple different quarters, what we found was that if we emulated some of the things that were working in commercial, which was to get product in the hands of the prospect immediately within the first meeting, if we could get product in the hands of that prospect within 24 hours and get them signing into our dashboard and starting to play around with the software and ship the product, then we had a drastically higher conversion rate than if we slowed it down and through a more traditional sales methodology where you go through a deeper discovery, a business value assessment, and then follow that up with scoping and tech workshops, and then follow that up with ultimately a hands-on product experience. And so we had like a 2.5x higher conversion rate in A/B testing those two models. And so that really was me taking a principle that I learned at BMC around understanding leading indicators and allowing the data to inform us on what the enterprise sales playbook should look like at Meraki at that time. And so what we did is we applied the rest of the goodness that comes out of that playbook. You know, we needed more pipeline coverage, also through understanding the leading indicators, mapped out the next 6, 9, 12 months at our current pipeline creation trajectory and saw that we were going to be short of growth goals. And so we fired up outbound PG Mondays and ran call blitzes and used the exact same structure that we had used at BMC to build a PG culture that was outbound. And that worked, and that was transferable. But I did not slow things down in the initial product experience with putting a BVA in front of it or an ROI calculator or a second level discovery. And we modified that first third of the sales process to adapt and adopt what was working in the other side of the business and married together, PG along with this high velocity motion that was working in commercial, transferring that into enterprise. And then we built out and instilled a MedPick opportunity framework and still, again, then applying what had worked through the playbook at enterprise sales methodologies and tested and tried and true, applied that again, just reversed the order in some of how we taught and executed the sales process, right? And so that's an example. That's the first one that comes to mind. But I would say, one of the key takeaways from that is to just, you have to be experimental. You have to be curious. You have to follow the data, and you have to adapt the same way that you would, as an entrepreneur. Great founders test early market product fit through iteration cycles. I believe that the same approach is entirely applicable to optimizing your go-to-market model.
It's so interesting, Jason. You sound like a scientist. The way that you actually described, what you're assessing, A/B testing, experimental. I don't know whether that is intentional, whether that comes from your engineering. You obviously changed your major, but you can kind of see that mindset of the science, and then you've got the artistry, and that really it seems to really kind of help you compartmentalize and really kind of assess where you are and obviously how you can move forward. So you obviously had a massive impact at Meraki. Tell us then about Twilio, because again, that was a huge different go-to-market motion as well. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was an entirely different go-to-market motion. It was an entirely different product, entirely different company. So the rest of the Meraki story that led to Twilio, I'll start with that, was you probably know that along that journey, so I was at Meraki a little over 4 years, and halfway through that journey, Cisco came in and acquired the company for what back then was considered to be a very, very big multiplier. And I stayed for a couple of years after the acquisition and made sure that our teams were on good footing and that the business would live on, and it's thrived. I think it's been one of the most successful acquisitions in the history of Cisco, if not the most successful by growth. And there was a day that came where the three founders all left on the same day, and the business is starting to change pretty dramatically. We left. Cisco did a great job leaving Meraki alone, and then we got to marry together the breadth of the Cisco ecosystem and the strength of its brand, and so that was all beneficial. The business was growing after we got through some of the bumps in the acquisition and integration, and for me, I felt like that journey had kind of taken its course. I had never set out to work for a bigger public company than the one I came from, or the two that I came for prior to. I caught the software bug in my journey at Meraki and decided that this is what I want to do for the rest of my working days, period. And so I left. I resigned about the same time that the founders did, and have great relationships with them to this day. And Hans Robertson was a great friend along that journey, and he introduced me to Jeff Lawson, founder of Twilio. And Twilio is well known, I think, for being the first, sort of viral developer PLG model that really took off and introduced a pay-as-you-go framework for this big, developer SaaS company. And Twilio is an API company in the end, and what we were doing back then at Twilio and how it got to the first 100 million for the company was really through the success of serving individual users, those developers that were coming onto the platform, signing up. By the way, when I got there were a little over 100 million. I think it was about 115 million or so when I started talking to Jeff and ultimately took the job. They had 34,000. We had 34,000 inbound users signing up to the platform every single month. It was completely viral in its adoption across the developer ecosystem. Builders could come and get started with just 4 lines of code and tap into the power of this cloud communications API platform and embed that interaction into contextualized application experiences. Think about Uber or Lyft or OpenTable or whatever. But some of the things that from a consumer perspective, that seems pretty logical that, on the back end, Twilio is powering that experience for you, that ride experience or that reservation experience. Some of the places you might not expect to find Twilio were really in your interaction with large enterprise brands, like some of the biggest banks in the world. When you're dealing with their applications or you're going through multi-factor authentication, a lot of that is built on and powered by Twilio. Contextualized contact centers. You're calling into a bank, or you click out of something, have a problem in an interaction on a website or an app, you might get dropped into to an interaction with a contact center that's powered on top of Twilio for that contextualized experience. And so it's a very powerful platform. At that time, 34,000 inbound users signing up every single month and getting started. And the business was built on the back of a long tail of those users. In fact, there was about 1.2 million users on the platform when I started, around there, million, two, something like that. And we determined a customer, we counted a customer as any one of those users that paid $5 or more a month. And so you could contrast this model where you have tens of thousands of developers signing up, going through a friction-free self-service journey, starting to build something immediately on the platform that are getting charged, decimals, 3 decimals in of a cent, per minute for some kind of volume interaction that's occurring on the back of those API calls. That's a wildly different journey than an enterprise sales-led software motion, right? And one of the things that I was brought in to do, I was there, by the way, as the VP of the global new business function. So I was brought in to build the new business functions: sales dev, inside sales, field sales, stand-up services, things of this nature. So it's all really the sales execution around acquiring new revenue. And the first thing I did was just look around at what's working, right? So I conducted 50 interviews of many different types of roles and people at the company, and spent some time with customers immediately. And I quickly learned that our most productive sellers in the business at that time, very early on, were the people that had been there the longest. Our top seller at that time had been in the business, I don't know, 4.5 years, I think it was at the time. He was one of the first early waves of sellers coming in at all. And we used to have this saying at Twilio, is like, with Twilio, it's really, to sell Twilio, you have to understand and help a prospect imagine the art of the possible. But if your entire sales ecosystem and your approach to the market is to walk in with an open-ended conversation and start with imagining the art of possible, that's really hard to teach and scale to hundreds of sellers as you seek going from 100 million plus to 500 million. You have investing into that growth levers that you have more control over, that you can be intentional about, that ultimately we could build investment strategies around, because we understand the unit economics of the dollar in and more dollars out that can be scaled across sellers and really augment the thing that was already working, which was the self-service journey and that viral adoption motion, right? And so my first charter there was to make sure we didn't kill what was already feeding the business, which was the self-service journey, and then optimize those tens of thousands of users that were coming in through contextualized experience, so that we could be more intentional about finding what problems they were solving for or outcomes they were building on top of the platform. My initial theory was that a self-service journey doesn't negate the decision-making process that every buyer goes through. Meaning that, and this was one of my first reports to the board after I took the job, was that I didn't 100% agree with the fact that people made the decision to use Twilio or not to use Twilio without human interaction. Twilio has, to this day, one of the best self-service journeys in the business, and the product is phenomenal. But the idea that I started with there, though, was that all of this work that's being built on this really powerful API platform serves a business. And I thought these users are in fact just that. They're users of the platform, but they show up on Monday and they work somewhere. And when they build something for their employer on Twilio's platform, the thing that they're building serves their customers. And if it serves their customers, they're likely solving a problem or chasing revenue. They're either creating value or solving a problem. And if those things exist, then there's a decision process to be had. And what we wanted to do was insert ourselves into that conversation, supplement the self-service journey, not trade it off, in a way that we could help them understand how to use Twilio, really accelerate adoption of Twilio by accelerating their interpretation of the art of possible, and then ultimately build something great for their business on top of Twilio. And how we went about unpacking that was a really very intellectually curious journey, I would say. I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't sure that the learnings that I had developed in my career up to this point were going to serve me very well, or serve Twilio very well in hiring me. So there was a moment very early on in this journey where I started to get concerned that this I'm not sure this is a great match. And so I partnered up. I had a hypothesis that we could insert ourselves with intention into this decision process to use Twilio, but needed to understand more about the outcomes that these customers were driving in the use cases that they were building on top of Twilio. And to do that, I partnered up with Manav Carrara, and you may know Manav. Manav is now the chief growth officer over at New Relic. At that time, in 2015, he was the VP of product marketing. And so Manav and I went off on this journey. I know you're going to say it sounds like a data science journey, but we went off on this journey to understand where are the patterns in 1 million users on Twilio. They're writing code, they're building apps, they're serving their customers. We know that. What patterns pop off the page if you were to really sort of step back and look at that entire body of users, of 1 million users, and then take that and contrast it against the same exercise in the sales pipeline? And what we found is that there were 9 predominant use cases that repeated themselves, both in the user base, the install base, as well as the open pipeline. And you could take those 9 use cases and extract it one level above that to 5 solution categories. In this exercise, Manav and I defined these solution categories as if these use cases were attached to a problem that someone was trying to solve or an outcome that someone was trying to unlock, what would they pull up Google and search for? And through that, we grouped them together to 5 solution categories. From there, we were able to start understanding the personas for each of these solution categories. And ultimately, we took it from having to understand a wide open art of the possible conversation into targeting in a very focused way the personas, both user personas and buyer personas of these 5 solution categories. At that point, we could then start to build sales enablement. We could build sales content. We could build ROI calculators. We could build use case specific demos that allowed customers to visualize the journey that they could go on to solve those problems or unlock opportunities. We built POVs. So we, instead of just throwing SEs and architects at an open-ended customer experience in the field, in the buyer journey, or supplementing that self-service journey if someone got stuck, we could start to be prescriptive and take the best practices around building Twilio for these solution categories and 9 use cases within the solution categories, and start to wrap it up with services so we could increase adoption once somebody made the decision to build on Twilio. We started then attacking and signing up and unlocking go-to-market partnerships with rev share agreements, with Salesforce and ServiceNow and many others, that we could start partnering together where there was overlap and alignment in how Twilio powered a use case or an opportunity that they shared in. And so, we started through this process really building a go-to-market motion, 5 different go-to-market motions for these solution packages that we could replicate and build marketing momentum around and build sales capacity around. And that, once we achieved that alignment, we could start to apply some of the best practices of the value-based selling framework and teach that to the sellers. And so that was part of the journey there.
It's an incredible journey, and I was about to say, your next part of your journey is obviously taking on a CRO gig, but I think the way in which you've just described your position, even though a job title of Global Vice President of Sales Services and Alliance, I think it's pretty clear that you were doing far more than just that, and really it warranted a CRO title. But talk to us, obviously, moving on now, got into Chief Revenue Officer over at Markforged. Tell us about that journey and your introduction into that opportunity.
Yeah, so I was recruited in You guys do a great job, by the way.
Thanks.
All you recruiters out there in the world. I was recruited into to that opportunity, and once again had the chance to meet a great MIT founder who was building out the world's first cloud managed 3D printers. And this is a bit of a deviation from some of the past opportunities I had worked on at this point, but it was really interesting in the sense that it was disrupting a major market. When I look at startups, I tend to look at the three T's: tech, TAM, and talent. Is there a big TAM where a lot of people care about the value creation curve that's unlocked through great technology? And I look for a tech founder that's a pure tech founder, somebody that is driving disruption through innovating and ultimately changing the status quo of that TAM in a way that you could follow on the initial innovation with multiple products and build a platform play around it. My experience has been that if you can find an opportunity that fits that criteria, you de-risk the growth journey along the way, which of course allows me to keep my job a little longer since I'm responsible for that. But it also just creates a lot of value for all of the employees and the shareholders along the way, because as you invest in that go-to-market motion, you align on that opportunity. The tech founder is there continuing the pace of innovation. Then you get more and more product to sell, and you can get more efficient as you grow and build a big company. And so I saw that opportunity in this MIT founder who was building the first cloud managed 3D printer. Not only that, he had developed IP around a hybrid material of carbon fiber and nylon. So they called it onyx, and he had this material that was stronger than aluminum, lighter than steel, and he had all these patents around it. And you could, with these cloud managed printers, you had this incredibly intuitive, multi-dimensional design experience. You didn't have to go into CAD and everything else, and you could just hit print once you got through the design of any product. You could hit print anywhere in the world, and it was pretty cool. That way, it was a lot like the cloud managed opportunity at Meraki. In the first cloud managed network architecture, and looking at the analogy or the parallels there, I saw this opportunity to disrupt this multi-trillion-dollar market in manufacturing ultimately over time. Now, in hindsight, we know that 3D printing has not disrupted the manufacturing market as fast as everyone predicted, myself included. But it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of growth. And we went from 12 million in ARR when I started there. Came in as a CRO and built out the team from next to nothing. We had I think a dozen sellers all in, with sales dev and sellers and channel people all in. I think it was about 12 people. I was the 71st employee, and we grew from there, from 12 million to 80 million in 18 months, and ultimately paved the way for the company to IPO after that. And so that was an interesting, it was my first official CRO title, and a very interesting opportunity. During my journey there, not only were we figuring out the sales motion, which was again unique and different because of the market we were serving and the competition in that space, the partner ecosystem that came along with the company that was already there and the way they were distributing the product, but also it was a really interesting experience for me to dive in and get my hands on some of the other functions of the business. In my time there, it was the first time that I had a chance to actually lead the marketing team and hire a CMO. We, for some period of time, had other functions of the business, like FP&A reporting into my organization. We had HR for a while reporting into my organization, real estate operations reporting into my organization. So, it was really the CRO gig plus a few other functions that over time, as we got bigger and bigger and bigger, we hired a CFO, hired a CMO, and sort of shed those functions and put them right back into the right place in the org. But it was a great opportunity for me to widen my exposure to different portions of the business, and then apply a lot of the same things that had worked for these other go-to-market plays and grow the business quickly. I could go on and on about.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. It absolutely is so interesting. I suppose by this time you've obviously worked for different types of founders. But what's interesting is that your next gig, CRO, the next big CRO gig, which was Harness, was actually working for a different type of founder, because obviously Jyoti Bansal was the founder of App Dynamics, and obviously we know the formidable sales organization and the incredible trajectory of that organization, which was also acquired by Cisco. So what was the difference working with a founder that knew the playbook compared to founders that previously hadn't?
It's a great question. So just for we'll pull this forward a little bit for your audience. So Jyoti Bansal, as you mentioned, was the founder of App Dynamics. Jyoti is an incredible visionary when it comes to product, and he's an engineer at heart. And so he drives fantastic product innovation. We started the conversation talking about my interview with John McMahon. John was an advisor to Jyoti as he was building out App Dynamics. My first day of leadership training after I took the job at BMC, this guy by the name of Dolly Rollick walked through the door, and it was one of the presenters from the field to talk about some of the principles around leadership at BMC, and that was my first exposure to Dolly. He and I are friends to this day, by the way, and he was the CRO for App Dynamics, as you probably well know. And of course, between John and Dolly, Jyoti learned the enterprise sales methodology around the value-based selling framework with an enterprise-led motion very well. In fact, I would venture to say that Jyoti mastered that in his AppD days, which set up a fantastic opportunity for me as I got connected into Harness. In the very early days, we were about $1 million in ARR back then. Again, I came in around 70 employees, and we were first. The product had just gotten out the door, only been selling for about 3 quarters at that time, and Jyoti had already started to invest, and he saw early on. He knew that the opportunity was there to service these big enterprise accounts, and through what we were building in Harness with continuous delivery as a service, the first product of its type. And sitting right in the middle of this log jam and the software delivery lifecycle, and automating that. And so he invested very early on. He went with the unit economics that you do as you start to understand the go-to-market model, where he bought for every sales rep that he would put into a region, he also put an SE and a sales dev rep to drive pipeline. And so I walked in again with a team probably in the 12 or 13 range by head count, really small, and he was like 5 reps, and we had some regions that were sharing resources. So really small, but out of the gates, it was the go-to-market model that we all know from AppD, and the value-based selling framework had already been kind of set up. Jyoti at the time would dig into opportunities and the forecast on the weekends in Salesforce. And so it was the first time I had ever worked for a founder who was proficient at navigating the CRM and understood the sales process in a way that he could inspect the MedPick execution of an opportunity the way a sales leader would. And then he would immediately start slacking me or texting me on the weekends. Hey, what about this? Why is this here? What's it's just, how many POVs are we running? And just look at we had dashboards built out. He was doing a great job. And my opportunity was to come in and partner with Jyoti in what had already been started, and really take it from there into a place that we could identify early traction, feed that traction quickly, and scale it. I will also say that some of that, and I'm making jokes here about Jyoti hitting you up on the weekend with opportunity inspection. But the flip side of that is that Jody and I can have very fluid conversations. Jody understands the investment economics around go-to-market in multiple phases of a company's trajectory. And so I would say that, for first-time founders, often who are great product people, often they may not understand the vernacular of go-to-market. So what I learned along the way prior to working with Jody was that I couldn't go into a conversation with a CEO and first-time founder and talk to them about the investment of building out go-to-market teams and how we scale it and ramp times and increasing efficiency through productivity per head and all these things. I couldn't do that until we had a common understanding of the words that I was using, the words that were coming out of my mouth, because they just didn't mean anything. It'd be like me walking into to an engineering stand-up and trying to keep pace with the methodology and the vernacular around building products. And so one of the first things that I kind of learned over time was that you had to just sort of slow that process with your founder down and establish a mutual understanding of the common go-to-market methodologies, the vernacular around it, the roles involved in it, the KPIs per sub function within go-to-market that you should expect now and as you build it at different phases, of having a scorecard of what good looks like as you grow and invest, and really having a regular cadence for reviewing that and reading that out. When I started working with Jody, we skipped all of that. We had velocity immediately in our conversations because by the third week on the job, we were building out a 3-year investment model. We just immediately got to work on setting big goals and backing into the investment it would take across all the go-to-market functions to achieve those goals, backing into our expected conversion rates at every step of the marketing and sales funnel, and then really just building out those teams and quickly iterating on feedback and observations along the way. And so that it's been an absolute pleasure, and I would say that's one of the major differences in having a second-time founder that's had the experience of building and operating a company around the playbook. Is it just made it a lot easier to snap in and immediately get to the big rocks of building out a company and through that partnership.
If I may, Jason, I think what's really interesting is that to this point, you've worked with great technologies, great products that have either almost sold themselves or they've had incredible market fit, and you've been able to tailor, to adapt in order to kind of meet that. But do you think that a company like Harness, I know it is a fantastic technology, do you think you would have had that trajectory and got to where you are from a revenue and growth perspective without laying the foundations that you have and the principles that you have working so closely with Jyoti at the beginning?
Yeah, so before I answer the heart of your question, it's much easier to be good at this job when you have fantastic products. Just so we're clear. But yes, I would, Jody sets big goals. He sets audacious goals. In fact, the first time we talked about the trajectory of Harness and the goals was in my second meeting with him. In my interview process with Jody, we really spent across 4 months. We had multiple interactions together, meals together, whiteboarding sessions together. By the time I showed up and started the first week at Harness, I felt like he and I were already on the same page because we had spent months aligning. And the first time he introduced his path to the first 100 million in ARR was the second time I talked to him, and he set up the construct really for the path that we're on now. And so I think there's a lot that goes into that. The short answer to your question is no. I don't think we would have reached these outcomes and grown this fast had I not had the opportunity to partner with someone like Jody. I also, and a big part of that is having a mutual understanding of of the framework and the go-to-market methodologies and the investments that go into it, and being aligned in the risks that we're going to take, and really being focused on continuous improvement and iteration in that process, and knowing that it's not only safe to fail or miss on some of those investment experiments, but actually encouraged. You know, if I were to, every quarter we sit down, Jody and I, to this day, 4.5 years later, every quarter we sit down at the end of the last day of the fiscal quarter, we sit down and talk about what went well and what didn't. And if I approach that meeting with nothing but great news, you know, he'd probably start to think I checked out or something. But we you know, so that's all part of the ingredients for success, right? Not just the understanding of this go-to-market methodology, but the partnership between your product-led founder and the go-to-market leader, I think, is critically important. And the alignment early on big goals. Like, you know, like, I mean, he sets big goals. I don't know that I would have set as big a goals for us as he did, but that's undoubtedly, you know, I got comfortable with him and leaned into him at every stop of the way, and that's undoubtedly what's driven a big portion of the trajectory that we're on. So having big goals, and that's not just revenue goals. I mean, you know, we've gone from one product to eight products that are ultimately capabilities of the most modern platform play in all of the software delivery lifecycle, competing against some of the giants in software. So that is true. Everything that I said here today is true for go-to-market, but that mindset is applied at Harness even in product innovation, in engineering teams, product management teams.
How do you, if you aren't in a situation where you don't have a founder that understands and appreciates go-to-market and understands the notion of slowing down to speed up, you know, what are the processes of educating those founders to really understand what the value is?
It's a great question. So I would say that this is one of the biggest things that I got wrong in my transition from going from an enterprise sales leader, you know, third line enterprise sales leader, running a big business, to building the model that the business goes to market with. That's a different. You do have to hone in on different skills and different conversations. And at first, I didn't appreciate that. I didn't understand. I didn't know that. Right? And so, going into Twilio is the first time that I really was participating in board meetings. It was the first time that I was sitting down directly with the CEO without somebody, you know, really there acting as a buffer in some of those discussions where we were openly having conversations and debating what the right go-to-market model looked like. As you can imagine, especially in a company like Twilio that had so much success early on without really a true, you know, sales framework or sales playbook. There was a lot of education there. And so I would say, if you boil that down, and not just Twilio, the others too, and you know, and that's true for Markforged, it's true for companies and CEOs that I advise or participate with in an advisory or board observer kind of relationship and roles. I see this pattern across first-time tech founders pretty widely. And so I think one of the things I would say, if I were to ask to give advice to a first-time CRO partnering with a first-time product-led CEO founder, is to just assume that you're talking past each other. Just right out of the gates, assume that you're going to be talking past each other. Slow down, and the same way you run an open-ended second level, third level discovery in a sales process, you have to apply that curious mindset to your interactions with your product founder if they're first time and they haven't had this benefit of experience like Jody did at AppD. And the other thing that I think is important is to assume that the intent is aligned. There's another big thing here. I think when you go from a sales leader role into an executive for a go-to-market, you have a mutually beneficial outcome construct right out of the gates, right? Your goals are the company goals. The biggest impact to your individual life as a CRO and the net wealth creation event that will define your family's future as part of investing your time into that startup will be about the value that you help create for the company, not the value of your commission plan. And that requires a bit of a mindset shift, I think. And so, but if you can get there, you immediately have this construct of a mutually beneficial outcome that's a shared benefit across you and the CEO and the other executives in the company that create this sort of safe space to have constructive conflict and get through that misalignment in vernacular. And then the third thing I would say there is you have to assume that it's going to take about a third of your time to get through those things. And so, don't get frustrated if you're a CRO and you're in that conversation. You can't allow yourself to get frustrated by the fact that you have to slow down and maybe even start with definitions of go-to-market definitions. And then have a great two-sided intellectual debate around personas and the ideal customer profile. And really start there and then work your way back into the go-to-market execution.
I want to give you the opportunity now. Obviously, Harness, you are still growing. You are still, on the upward trajectory. Why should someone join you on the journey?
I didn't expect to turn this into a commercial for Harness today, but I love it.
We thought we'd give you the opportunity.
Yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely. There's so many ways I could go with this, but if you just unpack one of the first things I said today in this interview around, understanding how to personalize your go-to-market playbook for the situation you're in, that all starts with just evaluating the company and the opportunity that company serves, right? The tech talent TAM. And if we were to apply that lens, the way that someone would be making a decision, their decision criteria for how they're going to invest their time, which startup they're going to go work with. And that's, by the way, that is exactly how I see that. And I tell candidates that all the time if they ask the question. I believe that every employee that joins the company is an investor, not only because they have equity, but because they're buying that equity through investing their time. And time is, as we all know, one of the most precious assets we could ever have. You can't replenish it. And so you should be making that decision through the lens of criteria that have a high level of scrutiny. And if we were to unpack that for Harness being at the center of that decision criteria, let's start with the TAM. I mean, the way we see the TAM is through the lens of developers. And the reason for that is if you or your listeners don't know what Harness is, Harness is the world's first modern software delivery automation platform. And so we apply AI, machine learning, in context of an automation platform that unlocks velocity and control and efficiencies and introduces governance to the entire software delivery lifecycle. And that's from the time that a developer checks in code into a repository to the time that it's running in a production environment where that company's customers are interacting with that code or that service. And there's teams that are trying to operationalize the efficiencies around running those services in an environment where they can be efficient, right? And they can serve those customers with the least amount of downtime possible, protect their brand. And if you could do all that and give the developers their nights and weekends back so that they don't have to frantically be worried about every time that they check code in and release a process, unlock innovation velocity for customers, our customers, Harness's customers, so that they can get away from releasing code every 6 months or every quarter, unlock velocity so that they can release code the instant that a developer checks it in. in an automated way without having to have teams and teams of people manually pushing something through. In doing that, what we ultimately serve through our platform is those 30 million developers that right now have to sacrifice their family time to try to achieve innovation velocity that serves their customers, right? And if you think about that opportunity, so that's what we do. That's our mission. Now, try to put some kind of math around how big that opportunity is, right? There's 30 million software developers today. On the average, in industrialized countries, those engineers make about 100,000 a year, right? So you do your quick math, and you can quickly see that this is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity to go affect the developer experience, the developer efficiencies, unlock innovation velocity so our customers can compete more or better in their segment and knock their competition out. We unlock a massive value prop that's only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you look at what's going on with AI right now, AI is further enabling efficiencies in the software delivery engineering process in and of itself, right? And this move from back-end engineering to front-end engineering, being able to attack full stack engineering efforts through the help of AI is actually, if you look at some sources in the industry right now, they say that there's going to be a 10x increase in the number of developers in the world. Right now, 30 million developers only represents 1% of the world's population. And it has one of the highest impacts in your everyday life and the way that you interact with applications and the brands that surround you. And so if you could sort of release that supply-demand problem on engineering and 10x the number of engineers in the world, Harness's opportunity it sits in the middle of that and only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, of course, you have the benefit of being part of a company that's ran by senior executives that have experience with building out multiple companies. Jody, of course, having a great outcome with App Dynamics, but amongst the executive team here, we have experienced executives at every function that have. There isn't a senior executive at Harness that's doing this for the first time. And I think that helps de-risk your journey as an employee. And then, finally, I would say that we haven't even started to unlock our full potential. I mean, our innovation velocity is moving so fast, going from 1 to 8 products in just a few years. And every year we have new product roadmaps that go out and disrupt other startups that are companies as big as us that will be aligned with just one of our product modules out of the 8 today, for example. And then, personally, I think that if you're in the go-to-market team, one of the things I would also end this conversation around why join Harness with is that we are incredibly focused on developing our talent. And I'm sure everybody says that, but if I've already give you an example and pull on one of the things that we talked about earlier today is like the understanding the leading indicators and understanding those leading indicators as it pertains to the activity and then managing the activity as opposed to just responding to the outcomes of the forecast. If you were to take that instead of taking an approach where you just manage like the number of new business meetings to opportunities to POVs to forecastable deals, and instead of managing someone or building teams that manage to the average, go through the effort to really contextualize that in an individualized experience and build coaching and development for every single IC in the team around their personal conversion history and their personal opportunity, their strengths, their weaknesses, and opportunities to get better. That's one of our core objectives of my leadership team is to achieve that, not just the numbers, right? And so we really are focused on optimizing the teams, the talent that have made the decision to join this journey in a way that they are better for the rest of their career than they were when they got here. And we want to do the same thing for some of those people that are early in their career that join us, that I had the opportunity of experiencing through many of the people I mentioned here today earlier in my career.
Great. And it's also, the rate at which you guys are kind of accelerating. It is a genuinely mind-boggling trajectory, and great team, and you're having such a great success at the moment. So I think this is the point where we obviously reflect on what we've heard today, Jason, because and I think there's a few things that really jump out at me, right? I think that the very first thing is that from the very beginning, your very first exposure to the playbook, I think what it really unlocked in you was that very scientific, very kind of the scientific approach of really understanding and investing the time required to understand the right go-to-market motion relative to what really works for that organization. Is creating a very bespoke approach. And even though in each of those organizations that you've worked, you've had to adapt the actual specific execution, the approach and the mindset to really go and discover what works, and that scientific approach has really served you well. So when we talk about the combination of science and artistry, it's not about replacing artistry, it's about enabling artistry to exist within axioms which allow it to really have creativity but also effectiveness. And I think that is really what is, that you really take away from what we've spoken about. And I think just a final thing, it's not just about creating a repeatable scientific approach, it's then putting an individual approach and really being able to tailor it to the individuals within your organization in an individualized coaching enablement way, which then creates the science, the art, and also the nurture which is required to generate success. So it's been fantastic spending this time with you, Jason. It's truly been a great interview. We've enjoyed having you on the show, and I'm sure our listeners and our viewers took lots from it today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I hope they did, and it's been a fantastic pleasure meeting both of you, Simon and Ollie, and thank you for the opportunity to spend some time together and share the journey.
Oh, Jason, it's been absolutely fantastic. I've loved every minute of it. I think, how Simon summed up there, the scientific approach to go to market that you've been able to adapt, throughout your entire career has really enabled you to, achieve in the trajectory of your career to get you to where you are today. So, it's absolutely fascinating and ridiculously inspirational. So, thank you so much for sharing in your journey. But to all of our listeners, please do like and subscribe to our various channels at YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. Don't forget to give some comments, likes, and share amongst your community. Thanks ever so much, and we look forward to welcoming you back soon. Take care.